Okay, welcome everybody. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Philip Barnes, who is a principal scientist in marine geology at the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, NIWA, in Wellington, New Zealand. So Phil is SEPM's 2023 winner of the Francis P. Shepard Medal for Excellence in Marine Geology, which is a fantastic achievement. So congratulations, Phil, for that.
Thank you.
My name is Laura McDonald. I'm a PhD student at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, and I'm studying vegetation change over the Pleistocene using pollen in deep marine sediment cores. And I actually know Phil because I've been down to NIWA for some of my PhD work, and Phil is the co-chief scientist of the IODP Expedition 375, which the sediment core I'm looking at for my PhD was collected on. So welcome, Phil. Thank you for being here today. And I guess we'll just launch straight into the questions, if that's all right. So the first one is, in 5 minutes or less, could you please summarize your path to the geosciences?
Sure. My pathway actually began back in 1980, believe it or not, as a 17-year-old. I just finished high school at the time and went to Victoria University of Wellington's Open Day. I caught a presentation introducing earth sciences by Professor Jim Cole, and I was just hooked in from that point. Jim gave a fascinating introduction with lots of slides of landscapes and volcanic eruptions and floods and things like this, and it certainly tweaked my interest to get started on the earth science sort of study pathway. So I did BSc and MSc honours at Victoria University back in the early 80s. My MSc project was on structural geology and sedimentology of some Cretaceous age rocks, in fact. And after that, I was fortunate to be able to join the New Zealand Oceanographic Institute, which was in those days part of one of our government departments called the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, DSIR. And so I got my first job with my master's degree behind me. And after a couple of years of working there, an opportunity came up for me to study for my PhD at the University of Canterbury, thanks largely to the support from my supervisors, Keith Lewis here from NIWA or NZOI at the time, and Hjaag Pedinga, who was my primary supervisor. So I did my PhD back in the early 90s and graduated with that in 1994. By that time, the DSIR had been disbanded due to some government restructuring of sciences. I had a year away in France working with a joint project and got a great deal of experience from that. And I came back to NIWA afterwards, which had been established by that time. And I've since spent the rest of my career working at NIWA. So that's where I came from, into the earth sciences.
Nice, that was good being able to summarize so much in such a short space of time. Also, so the next sort of questions are about your career in general. So what are you the most proud of in your career?
Well, I think it goes without saying I'm proud to have received some peer recognition. I mean, you really can't do better than that. The recognition from your peers is one of the most satisfying things you can receive as a researcher. So to have been recognised worthy of sort of honours and things, it's really quite special. And it happened to me 3 years ago with a fellowship of the Royal Society of New Zealand, and I was so proud of that. And of course now the Shepard Medal is something beyond my dreams, really. So I'm very proud of those achievements, but I guess behind that sort of recognition, I'm also sort of proud of some of the pieces of work that I've done, not necessarily the specific things, but just some general things. So for example, I was part of a New Zealand delegation to the UN for several years back in the 2000s when we successfully argued our case for our legal continental shelf under UNCLOS Article 76, and that was a very proud moment to be part of that. We made a claim for seafloor territory that now belongs to New Zealand, and as a Kiwi, that was a very cool thing to be involved in. I think from my research work, you know, I'm also kind of proud of the fact that when I started doing my career, there was fairly limited knowledge about our active crustal faults around our coastlines and the geohazards and risks that were associated with those. And over the years, I've been responsible for, you know, coordinating or building a data set and a project and perhaps a sort of a legacy of knowledge that's there now, and it's genuinely made some differences because it helps to underpin our geohazard models, you know, for say earthquake and tsunami hazard and so forth. So I kind of feel like I've sort of made a real difference for New Zealand. And in another space, I guess, as well, with the type of work that I do in submarine neotectonics, you know, I'm kind of proud as well in some ways from an international context that myself and a group of others, in the early days at least, there weren't too many of us doing this sort of work. And I think collectively, I've sort of played my role in pushing along advances and techniques and understanding and methodologies. And, you know, so I'm kind of proud that I was sort of part of the development, if you like, of what is a relatively young field in earth sciences and in the capacity of submarine neotectonics. So I'm kind of chuffed that I've been part of that journey as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Kind of like lots of sort of little wee things along your journey that pretty proud of. Yeah, no, it's very cool. Lots to be proud of. So have you encountered any challenges or setbacks that have actually turned out to be valuable experiences?
I'd have to say probably no major setbacks, thankfully, in my career. I'm fortunate in that context. You know, we get the odd journal reviewer that doesn't like our work, and you have to deal with that from time to time. They're far from major setbacks, you know, and you learn from them and move on. They're part of the process. So no major setbacks really. I think there have been some technical challenges. You know, what I do is in plate boundary science, it's very multidisciplinary, and you can't be on top of everything, and you're trained in your disciplines and you learn from your experiences. And you know, frankly, I'm a geologist, but I'm often working in the space of geophysicists. You know, and that can be challenging. You know, one thing I have learned over the years is, you know, in environments, for example, like technical workshop forums and things like that, where you're engaging with a lot of other specialists, I've sort of learned over the years to maybe to not get overwhelmed by material you're not familiar with. You know, don't feel unworthy. Just basically embrace the idea that you're there because you know you can contribute in your domain, and that's needed as part of the sort of the jigsaw of pulling things together. So, you know, those are sort of technical challenges, but yeah, as I say, I think it's about feeling comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, it is sort of one of those things that can sometimes when you hear new things or stuff that people are working on, it's like, oh, I don't know anything about that. But yeah, it's definitely sort of, I guess that's probably something that comes with time as well, as like recognizing sort of your part that you kind of play in it all.
Absolutely, yeah, yep.
Yeah, oh, very cool. So if you could go back in time, is there anything that you would have done differently in your career? It's sort of a tricky question.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a lot to do with earthquake hazard assessment, and I've very much enjoyed being on this because I do marine work around the coast. I interact quite a bit and engage with you know, a lot of onshore field-based earthquake geologists. I've very much enjoyed the work that they do, and you know, I've sometimes thought, gosh, if I ever started out again, I wonder if I would have chosen that as a pathway. You know, to become a sort of a land-based paleoseismologist, but I've found ways to involve these things in my own work from the marine side and to develop niches in that area. So as I say, I'm quite pleased about that. I think, you know, looking back on my career, I've been involved in a lot of projects that we've done a lot of good work that's publishable, but it hasn't all been published, at least not yet. And that can be a bit frustrating when you've got, you know, so many things on that you're always on the move or need to move to something else. And, you know, so it can be a little bit frustrating that, you know, I haven't published all the stuff that I've actually achieved. Maybe if I could turn the clock back, I wish I could be a little bit more efficient and try to get that out, but I've done my best. That's me.
Yeah. I guess with some of those things with publishing, it's probably just like a bit of a lack of time to actually be able to like sit down and like, you know, get it all on paper.
I guess it's time management and just, you know, working through stuff. Yeah, best you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, nice. So the next lot of questions are about sort of work-life balance and daily schedules and stuff like that. So, how do you, it's funny just talking about time management, how do you manage your time and
Hmm.
try to maintain a bit of a work-life balance?
Oh gosh, Laura, that's such an important topic, eh?
Yeah.
It's one that's not always, I think, that it's not always obvious where one is at in this space. You know, it's kind of one of those things you have to go along and get some experiences and feel your way and learn your boundaries. You know, I think of the analogy of, say, a sports person, you know, who is motivated and goes through a period of overtraining, which is fine, until something goes wrong, you know, and they kind of look
Mhm.
back and go, you know, and so, you know, it's important people learn from their own work habits and that, isn't it? Where your own boundaries are and to recognize those. You know, I think, to be honest, yeah, I've had periods in my career where I've definitely not had good life balance, particularly in my senior years, you know, where work can really get overwhelming and on top of you. Um, and it's about, as I say, finding your ways through those. You know, from my experience, I found in my early career that the highs and lows of workload and pressure and stress sort of are manageable, and it's a kind of a roller coaster to do with deadlines and things like that, you know. And then as you move through your career, maybe through middle and into senior roles, you know, it can be a trap to feel overwhelmed with just so much stuff to do, you know. And as I say, you really have to work your way around that and see the signals. It's not healthy or productive, obviously, if people are really not in a good space. And you know, I think I've learned, you know, how to find those balances. My wife Annette and my two children, of course, who are now adults, you know, that's the biggest balance you can have, is to have family around you. And I suspect without them, I know in my work, I'm kind of a bit of a grinder at the office, and knowing my work habits, I could quite easily have become a workaholic, I think, if I didn't have family and friends around me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I try to use some sporting interests as well. You know, that's important. I think exercise and getting out is important. And so years ago, I used to be a very keen runner. But over the years, I've enjoyed mountain biking and golf, and you know, even nowadays, I still try to do those on the weekends. And during the working week, I go to the gym most days, and I like to do that at midday, so I can break my day into two halves. And it's a way of getting off my seat, getting out of the office, and I think that helps you to clear your mind and just get some blood flowing.
Yeah,
So
kind of like,
that's how I like to do it. And if I'm feeling a bit sort of overwhelmed and stressed, I realize, you know, that I just need to sort of back off a little bit, yeah, and take one thing at a time.
yeah, sometimes it's a tricky one with that with stress when it's like, you know, and I guess that's probably just a thing that you sort of learn, that kind of like backing off thing, when sometimes if you're stressed and you have so much on your plate, you kind of just think like, I've got to keep going and get it done, then I won't be stressed. But yeah, that's definitely a good lesson. And yeah, the like when also with the thing with the gym and stuff like that, when the work that you're doing is such brain heavy, it's important to kind of like get moving and kind of move that energy sort of somewhere
Yeah,
else.
yeah. I think workplaces are more sensitive to it nowadays as well, you know, but it's still up to individuals to kind of be wary of that and to always be on the lookout for you know, for feeling where they are themselves around their own boundaries.
Yeah. Oh,
Very
cool.
important topic.
Yes, yeah, 100%. So what skills have been essential for your job, and what are some foundational skills that you think could benefit all geoscientists?
Okay, I think like in addition to maybe just basic writing and analytical skills, I think a good researcher has to develop what I think of as good research instincts. And these are things that are kind of a bit fuzzy, but sort of driven really by people's passion, you know, to discover stuff and to learn about things. And you have to develop good research instincts to be a good researcher, in my opinion. In my own case, I try to quantify active processes, and I try at least to be as creative and innovative as I can with sort of project planning, where and what type of data to collect, and what, you know, how to use it. A lot of my work's based around seismic reflection and bathymetric, seafloor bathymetry, geomorphology data sets combined with geological samples. And so I'm often integrating these things, and I try to find smart ways of getting the answers, you know. I'm not sure if it's really a skill, but having perseverance is a pretty handy thing to have, you know, because sometimes you just have to be able to just grind through the work, and, you know, it's not always clear that you've seen the light of the tunnel, but it comes. Another thing in my space, in structural geology, it's a very handy thing to be able to think in 3 dimensions. And I think right from my student days, going back to Victoria University, classes in structural geology, you know, I think I've always enjoyed being able to think of geology in 3D space, and that's very helpful when you're working with, you know, geological structure in particular, especially like where you've got lots of different tectonic settings and structural complexity. So I think that those are sort of quite specific skills. I would say maybe above all, I think it's very important. One of the foundational skills, if you like, it's not perhaps not a skill, but I think that having, you know, having some degree of integrity is really critical. You know, and I think of that, for example, as you know, striving for the right answer and not just an answer.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? I think of it that way, that, you know, it's a personal kind of mission for you to, you know, to try to really understand something. So I think of that as a sort of the, you know, the integrity of where you're setting your own standards. I think that's where the satisfaction really comes from, you know.
Is, I guess, one of those questions that's sort of coming up next. But yeah, it's kind of tricky then when you kind of get into sort of, I don't know, I feel like when you're just like, oh, I've got to publish, got to do this, you know, but to kind of really think about that kind of overall goal, and just, yeah, wanting to like strive to sort of find the answer, you know. Yeah, that's a good thing to keep in the back of the head. Yes, so the next question is, and this is a bit of I wonder how you're going to answer this. It's interesting. Are success and fulfillment interchangeable? And then within the context of your experiences, how would you define them?
That's a challenge, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I would say they're probably not totally interchangeable. I think of them differently. Maybe from my experience, I would think that fulfillment is the enjoyment factor of your work, you know. And so, for example, for me, what I really enjoy doing in my position is I love the side of discovering stuff. I love and figuring things out, much more so than and perhaps the other side of it is actually finally publishing it so others can actually see this as well. But I really enjoy the doing the work part of it. I always have. So I love working on data, collecting it, working on it, and knowing that I'm going to be able to deliver something that's kind of cool and new. I think that's fulfillment, you know, when you're really doing what you enjoy doing in your occupation. leading to some sort of discoveries and things like that. Figuring something out for the first time, that's fulfilling. And on the other hand, I would think that like success is sort of more of a measurable, and and perhaps that relates then to outputs and outcomes that are delivered and so on. Papers, reports, presentations, maybe outcomes that have been achievable because of what you've already published, etc. So I think that for me, those are the things. Fulfillment is the kind of the enjoyment factor, and success probably more of the measurable. Yeah.
The fulfillment's kind of like just the everyday in the background, and that's the success, is like can put a stamp on it, like this is what I've done, this thing.
Yeah, I guess from what we've been chatting about, if you're not fulfilled by your work, you simply probably don't really have the passion for doing what you need to be doing, and I think it all comes together.
Yeah, and I feel like then that in turn makes it probably hard to be enjoying it.
Yeah, right.
Okie dokie. So are there days that you don't want to go to work, or do you every day always enjoy what you do?
I'd have to be honest. I mean, no, there probably are days that I'd rather be doing something else. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe there are days that you just got a list of stuff you've got to grind out that's not so enjoyable, and that's part of the workplace environment, isn't it? Or maybe you're just thinking of stuff that you'd rather do outside of work that you've been involved in, and if that's the case, that's probably a positive reflection that you've got some work-life balance and you've got a few other things on your mind, eh?
Yeah, you'd be a bit worried if everything you had was just all work.
Yeah, I mean, after a long career, you don't stick at something if you don't really enjoy doing what you do, though, fundamentally. But yeah, sure, there are days where you can't be on form every day. Eh?
It's kind of good to hear from sort of a more sort of like junior perspective, even the people like you who are so high up in the field, like not every day, you're loving it and wanting to do all the work. So it's kind of nice to hear.
I think it comes back to work-life balance, doesn't it? There are other things in life. It's a great job to have. It's fantastic and interesting work. And we're lucky to be able to do it for a career. But I think if you've got work-life balance, then sometimes your mind's on other stuff too. I think that's a good thing. Eh?
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so the next lot of questions are sort of about the future of geoscience, and sort of some of them about how it relates to society sort of in general. So how do you think the geoscience field has changed over the years, and how do you see geoscience research evolving in the next few years?
Well, I've seen a lot of change in my career, probably showing my age, but back in the late 80s, for example, all of the data we worked on was analog. There was no digital data back then, at least not around my environment. Laptops, for example, were only just coming on our desks. We used to submit papers, to editors via the post and wait for the reviewers' comments to come back. The same way. You used to walk across the car park to the library and Xerox papers, to do your reading. And these were very mechanical and slow ways of working. And obviously technology now, in this day and age, the advances we've got for all kinds of stuff makes a massive difference. Data acquisition, spatial imaging, software, internet, fast access to everything, literature, communications. It's incredible the changes, really. Everything's just a click away, and what you're achieving, it's out there in the domain very, very quickly nowadays. So it's very fast. Hard to stay on top of everything because there's so much stuff pouring in there, but it's just so much easier than it used to be, and so much faster. Probably another significant change is in the area of funding. Funding systems, they're constantly changing, and they've changed tremendously over the years, lots of different ways. Sometimes it's quite cyclical, things sort of swing around. And I'd say in New Zealand at the moment, we're not really in an environment of very stable funding. It's quite a tough industry to be working in. And I think in the coming years, it's going to be critical that that's achieved, for people to be able to continue to do good research. I think in the future, there's always going to be a demand for applied science, for people, basically for sustainability, for people to be able to, to have a socioeconomic. So yeah, I think there have been definitely big changes. Most of them, I think the biggest changes clearly are in the technological space. Yeah.
Yep, and then I guess the sort of like I guess all that's just going to continue in the next coming years with the technology stuff. It's going to be interesting to see.
Absolutely, yeah. Things just get better and better all the time. There's always new toys coming on board, and it's really one of the reasons why people like myself have basically been content, I guess, to have a career and within the same institute, within the same environment. I mean, New Zealand's got so much to offer, and as the years have gone by, the technology's changed so much. It just offers so much more. You can do things that you couldn't dream of when I first started. New toys allow you to think of cool ways to get answers that you could never have got before.
Yeah. I wonder if some kind of like, say when I'm a bit older, if a few generations down would be like, oh, I can't believe how they used to do it in 2023, so manual and slow or something like that.
Yeah,
that's
for
funny
sure.
to think about.
Yeah, the mind boggles.
Yeah, literally. So next question, what impact has geoscience research had on human sustainability?
Oh, I'm not sure if I'm an expert in this space. I guess, geosciences really provide fundamental knowledge about the Earth and a natural physical environment, and having that's pretty critical for humans to be sustainable, on the planet. For example, in the resources space, it's through geoscience work, where we've been able to identify, what and where our resources are, how did they form and at what rates did they form at, which ones of them are renewable and which aren't.
Yes.
How best to use them and so forth. I think also, through geoscience, we're sort of always quantifying processes. So, for example, say in the climate space, say the climate crisis we're in now, the climate space, you think of all the fundamental work that's been done on climate and oceanography, sea level rise, and the sort of the natural variability in those processes, variability in rates and magnitudes and frequencies and things, and that sort of creates like an underpinning sort of framework, doesn't it, for us to be able to measure, benchmark against for, when humans are doing some activity or applying something in a way that you've got some measure to see whether that's having an impact on the environment. And obviously in the climate space, that's playing out now in front of us. It's a bit of a shame, isn't it, that geoscience had a role to play in, I guess, the exploration and exploitation of some of the resources that, have led to fossil fuels being burned, and this is where society's at. It's obviously led to tremendous growth and advance in society at the same time. But now we're seeing the repercussions, and I guess geoscience will probably play a role in new technologies and so forth. I guess you've got to be able to forecast, and maybe to mitigate against things as well. I would say perhaps another way. Well, there's always going to be at least in the foreseeable future, there's always going to be a demand for non-renewable resources. Minerals, for example, are such a key part of the technology that we use and need. So, I think as things advance, society advances and technologies advance, the trick will be to find ways of extracting and using the resources we have, in a more environmentally sensitive way, in a way that's not going to damage the environment or minimize that. I think in my sort of specialty area, one of the other obvious ways that we've contributed really is through the identification of geohazards and risk, and obviously that plays out in terms of underpinning models that allow you to estimate the frequencies and magnitudes of events that can be expected somewhere in different time frames, so that things can be mitigated against, makes people live in more safer environments. It plays out in terms of planning, design, engineering, civil defence, preparedness for disasters and how to respond to them and recover from them, things like that. So, so clearly the geohazard space has got a very strong pathway, and that will, only continue to increase.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting then, I guess, thinking back to that thing you're talking about before with sort of funding being so sort of unstable, but then kind of like looking at the future and sort of all the things that geology, geosciences are going to be so important for. It's kind of, that's going to be a bit of a challenge, and I wonder if that will sort of have to change a bit,
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm sure that there are many ways to look at that question you asked. Human sustainability and geoscience. Those are, a few ideas, but there's probably a long conversation could be had there.
100%. The whole interview could probably be on that one question. So this question is a bit more about outreach. So do you think that geoscientists are doing a good job at outreach to non-geoscientists, and what ways could we improve on this?
I would say in general, yes, is the answer there. I think so. Most research organisations and universities nowadays have, quite specific teams of people that are there in the communications, media sort of space, and they're there to, to help researchers to get their science into sort of more digestible formats and forums. Everything from mainstream media, TV interviews, radio, social media platforms, film documentaries. There's just so many different ways. I mean, public presentations and educational kind of, more popular style articles. They're really part and parcel now of being a researcher, aren't they? And I think they're an integral part. And also too, just actually direct, face-to-face meetings with key stakeholders and next users, stakeholders, and so forth. People that actually want to use your data and benefit from it. I would say that, frankly, in New Zealand at least, and probably globally, it's just about impossible to write a funding proposal, if you don't have an outreach component that's up to scratch. So yeah, I think it's pretty well in tuned there now.
That's cool. So do you think that there are sort of ways that like researchers themselves or anything could like improve on that? Or do you think that it's just like good at the moment? Like, do you see like any other ways, or?
I think the general facilities is sort of there in place, but maybe, obviously individuals can improve, some are better than others at doing this sort of stuff. People put more or less effort into social media or whatever it might be, and so, I think from an individual basis, it would be, I would say, quite easy for many of us to improve. I could certainly improve. I personally sort of draw on people around me in the organisation to try to help me out with some of that stuff. But we all have to do most of those things that I mentioned, you know. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what new ways will come, but I think that those are all in place, and it's probably about individuals really just trying to tune in to a place that they feel comfortable themselves.
Oh, cool. Okie dokie. So with challenges in securing job opportunities, why should one consider a career in the geosciences?
Why? Wow. Because it's an industry with so many opportunities, isn't it? You know, it's a kind of a work. It's a work that you can do stuff that actually is really meaningful and genuinely needed by society and interesting. You know, and more than likely you're going to be surrounded by smart people and often very inspirational people. You know, so I think it's just a really good environment to be working in. You know, I do agree that there are some challenges particularly for young startups to get in there and to secure permanent positions for early career researchers as well. Yeah, that's for sure. But I guess I would say to most students that basically, you know, if you've really got a passion for doing this, just hang in there, and you know, because most good students and early career researchers will with some perseverance will get the opportunities, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, it can be tough, but I think yeah, most people will get the opportunities if they persevere and do their work.
That's sort of worth hanging in there, you know.
Yeah, it's a good sector it's a good environment to be working in, you know, when you're surrounded by people with a similar passion, you know, for discovery and figuring things out, and you know,
Yeah.
and you know, you need to be motivated by doing work
Yeah.
that you think is going to really make a difference, you know.
Mm-hmm. And I
Yeah.
guess it's also kind of cool, like, you know, the sort of people who you are working with, you know, everybody has their kind of own little quite unique sort of field, you know, and like there's just the range of things that geoscientists do, you know, is pretty cool. And for people going
Yep.
into the careers, it's like I would have never known that I was going to be looking at pollen and deep marine sediment cores when I started my geology degree, but there's just a lot of cool pathways.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's so many opportunities in there for specializing in different areas or yeah.
Nice. Um, so what are some of the key transferable skills you've been able to develop over your career, and what skills do you think would be most pivotal for students and early career professionals to develop their career prospects?
Well, I personally at least try to be as creative and innovative as I can, as I said earlier, with my projects, my research, especially with the planning and data acquisition and analysis stages. I think that's really what provides the motivation for the work. You know, when publishing, you know, I personally try to sort of think carefully about, you know, the data gaps, what are the big questions? What's the niche for the piece of work you're doing? Where does it actually sit in the literature space? You know, and how can I make a contribution? It's, you know, try to think that way right from the get-go, because then you're really driven to try to achieve something that you know is going to sell, you know, and really make a difference. And you know, I find that helps me at least to be able to structure, you know, my written material as well, you know, papers, reports and things. If I kind of know really what I'm trying to deliver, that's something new here, you know. I guess having said that, you know, writing is difficult. It doesn't come easy for me. Some people are brilliant writers, and you know, I have to grind it out like many other authors. I suspect I do better at it than I used to. I certainly get where I need to be faster than I would have in my early career. One thing I do take a lot of care in is the work I do on my figures and graphics. I think because they're very much an integral part of selling a story. You know, when you write a paper or a report, they're so important, the graphical material. So I put in a lot of attention to producing nice quality material, and I try to integrate that into my writing as well, so that becomes part of the story, not just a bit of something to look at on the side. And I think that's something I've probably learned from basically from peer review to do better at those kind of things. In particular, I think from the graphics side, my university sort of supervisor was Professor Jörg Pettinger at University of Canterbury. He was he is a real expert in this space, and he taught me well, I think, and he's remained a close colleague over all my career. I think all of those things are transferable. You know, those are general, they're all transferable skills. And whenever I'm in a supervisory role or engaging with an early career scientist, I kind of try to make an effort to instill these sort of ideas, encourage people to think, about some of these things.
Yeah. So those sort of skills that it's like when you're doing your degrees or stuff, it's not like you're doing a paper learning this specific thing, but it's just one of those things that you learn with time and all of that. Looking at the future trajectory of geosciences, what do you wish to get involved in or work on?
Well, I guess in my domain, I would say we're going to see more regular access to high resolution data sets, spatial data, seafloor spatial data from shipboard or AUVs, autonomous underwater vehicles. You know, we're going to sample and view more with remotely operated systems. We're going to work more with 3D volume seismic data sets. You know, I mean, these are all luxuries, of course, and expensive toys to have, but this will be the way of the future, that these will become more and more in more regular science, I think. For me personally, in terms of the work directions, I still have a few key things that I'd like to work up on some of our major fault systems, strike slip and subduction zone events in particular, subduction zone, and some of our large crustal strike slip faults that carry all the high slip plate boundary strain. So they're going to keep me busy for a bit while I get some of that material through.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Oh, very cool. So that's the end of sort of the main questions. There's sort of one to kind of round it off, finish it. It's a bit different to the ones we've just been talking about. So reflecting on your passion towards your discipline, do you think that loving what you do comes with time?
I think you need to be passionate to enter and stay in the industry, the science research industry or sector, if you think of it that way. Yeah, you've got to have the passion there to be there and to stay in it for a start. But I guess maybe to some extent, you also develop that passion further with experience, because the reason I say that is, as you get more experienced, you know so much more, and you can see more opportunities, and you can do things that you perhaps couldn't do when you first start out, And so, to some extent, perhaps the passion can develop as your experience develops as well. Maybe.
But it kind of helps to have, you've got to sort of have that starting kind of like push, like.
Yep. Yeah. But as you say, does it come with time? Yeah, I think to some extent it's kind of always there, but maybe it's not really passion, but just an understanding of what you can achieve, and your motivations can change because the technology's changed and your knowledge is wider, and you can now try to answer questions that you couldn't earlier on. So, so the motivation continues to roll along. So perhaps it's not really passion. You really have to have that in the first place, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Oh, it's very interesting. Thank you so much, Phil, for
Oh,
talking with me today.
pleasure. Yeah, lovely to
It's
chat.
yeah, it's so cool hearing, like, obviously meeting you before, but hearing all your answers to these questions. It's really cool.
It's a pleasure.
Sweet, thanks. Oh, and then congratulations again on winning the Francis P. Shepard Medal. So yeah, fantastic.
Oh, thank you
Cool.
very much. Yeah, it's a
Sweet.
big privilege.
Yes. Awesome.